Welcome to our congregation. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We're a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams, but we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end a service aware of the love that we have for each other. If you have announcements, please submit them to Mike, our administrative assistant, so that they can get in the newsletter and so forth. Each week we look at our principles. This week we are looking at the second principle, conveniently located in the front of the hymnal. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. It's kind of interesting that justice and equity, which sound somewhat measurable and rule-based, are put in there with compassion, suggesting that justice and compassion are equally important. And that compassion might temper justice, even though justice might also create a situation that someone was to be compassionate for, a feeling that someone had suffered an injustice and we had to be compassionate for them. I will now light the chalice myself because I really like playing with flames in public. And because the sound of a match flaring in a church or a church service for me is quite special. Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, bring to us beauty, vision, and joy. Our opening words, suggested by my father, Karl Martland, who is speaking for us today, are from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 12 and 13. For we see now through a glass darkly, but we shall one day see face to face. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity. Betsy Bear will now bring us the affirmation. And afterwards, our musical guests, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashua, New Hampshire, will bring us hymn number 1, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door.
In greening lands begins the song, which deep in human hearts is strong. In cheerful strains your voices raise, to fill the whole spring world with praise.
time for the offering. Congregation needs money to operate, to pay its workers, to pay its bills, to take care of our building. Please keep paying on your pledges. Please watch for fundraisers that will be coming. Thank you for your contributions. Although I always feel a little silly talking about people's generous contributions and thanking them for them, because although I am grateful, they haven't given them to me. We've kind of all shared the money with each other for this common purpose. When you give money to the church, you're not so much giving it away as helping to contribute to something that you benefit from directly and indirectly. At this time, we remember all those who have a sorrow and cannot meet friends and family to grieve, all those who have a joy that they might feel awkward about sharing amid so much worry and sadness, and all those who still feel a loneliness that the telephone and the computer can't fully repair. And I would like to add a few special thoughts. A thought for those who find that the isolation period has been long and wish they could come out of it, but either out of a sense of duty or for their own safety really can't yet. I would like to express a concern for people who really shouldn't be going back to work for their own safety, but who are basically forced to by the choices of their employer and their government and economic necessity. I would like us to remember everybody who's unemployed, and everybody who fears becoming unemployed or self-employed and fears losing income. And I'd like to offer a hope that from what has become a very contentious spring, we might move forward into a period of somewhat greater cooperation, nationally and internationally as well. Cooperation, trust in science, trust in evidence. That last part was me speaking, Sam Martland, lighting a candle, not the congregation. Let us now in the silence take a few moments for reflection, followed by the performance of Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our transitional words are from Henry David Thoreau, entitled Relaxation. A broad margin of leisure is as beautiful in a man's life as in a book. Haste makes waste, no less in life than in housekeeping. Keep the time. Observe the hours of the universe, not of the railroad cars. What are 80 years and 10, hurriedly and coarsely lived, to moments of divine leisure in which your life is coincident with the life of the universe? We live too fast and coarsely, just as we eat too fast and do not know the true savor of our food. And now I'm pleased to introduce my father, Karl Martland, with a sermon which he prepared and recorded for us this week at his home in New Hampshire. He would, in a normal spring, have been here now, getting ready to go to my daughter's high school graduation and generally enjoying the spring in Terre Haute. This is, of course, not a normal year. He was on our calendar from months ago, and he has spoken to us now.
Good morning. My talk is entitled Hope, Faith, and Charity, and I feel I should start by explaining why I've switched a couple of words when I referred you to 1 Corinthians 13:13. As a long-suffering Red Sox fan, I long ago learned the nature of these three components of my spirituality. I was born on the day that Ted Williams hit his only inside the park home run for a 1-0 victory that clinched the 1946 pennant for the Red Sox. Among my earliest memories were my annual bets with my father. Not that the Red Sox would win the World Series or even win the pennant, but that they would finish in the first division. Not a big deal, but back then it was all about all that New Englanders could hope for. It was a couple weeks after my 21st birthday, 21 years later, that the impossible dream team surprised the world of baseball anyway, by winning the pennant on the last day of the season and extending the World Series against the feared St. Louis Cardinals to 7 games. From then on, year after year, fans filled Fenway Park, full of hope that the Red Sox would win it all. Full of hope, but rather lacking in faith, as the Red Sox often came close, but always seemed to fail at the end. A couple of bad calls by an umpire one year, a crazy pop fly home run by Bucky Dent of the hated Yankees in the '78 playoff, Bill Buckner's error in a passed ball in the 1986 Game 6 against the Mets, 2 outs, 1 strike away from World Series, but no. And on and on and on it went. So through the 90s, into the 21st century, hope endured. Hope was rewarded with much better than average success, but no World Series until that incredible comeback against the Yankees in 2004. Only then did we have faith that the team would go to the World Series in 2004 and win it, and they did. 4 straight. And in 2007, they did it again. So now, Sox fans have hope the team will win, faith that they will win, and we have charity toward those whose miscalls, errors, bad mistakes, managerial failure to relieve the pitcher led to those painful earlier losses. That's why I put hope ahead of faith when citing the verse from 1 Corinthians. And charity is indeed the greatest of the three, although it may be the most difficult to define or to practice. Okay, enough for now about the biblical verse. Let's move on to the quote from Thoreau. When I last spoke to you, my topic was Beside Still Waters, and I referred to Thoreau as one of my heroes, and I showed photos of what we can see in the natural world if you only take the time. In January, I agreed to speak to this congregation in May when we planned to return to Terre Haute for graduation, Caroline's graduation, and other important family events. Of course, by mid-March, it was clear that we, along with most everyone else, would not be going anywhere in May. I figured I was off the hook. Why not? I won't say I hoped I was off the hook, but I did have faith that I would not be standing in front of this congregation on this day, today, May 24th. And in fact, I'm not standing in front of you, and it's not today, May 24th, it's actually today, May 21st, and I'm sitting in my own living room, and I'm presenting this because my son, Sam, and my grandson, Leo, or perhaps the proper order is Leo and Sam, figured out how to produce online productions for these services. So I was back on deck to stretch the baseball theme a little bit further. What would I talk about? Life during quarantine? Well, you have to talk about that. Everybody will. We'll all be talking about it. Could I give another nature talk about using your quarantine time bonus to spend more time outdoors? Possibly. Especially after spending a good deal of my own time bonus indoors, sorting through my books, sifting through old files, and reorganizing my office. That's when I came across the quote from Thoreau that we read. A little book. Thoreau on Man and Nature, published in 1960. There are a series of these little books that I read, and that's where I came across that paragraph. Now, I think that Thoreau somehow wrote that paragraph especially for me. As you know, if you listen to my previous talk, after retiring and moving to a rural village in New Hampshire, I have indeed slowed down. I have kept time with the hours of the universe, and I have enjoyed moments of divine leisure in which my life is coincident with the hours of the universe. However, you may not know that much of my professional career actually was spent keeping time and observing the hours of railroad cars. Did you ever wonder how much time freight cars spend in freight yards? How many hours spent in passing sidings? How long it takes to load or unload a coal train? No? That's hard for me to believe. But after years of talking with people, after services and after cocktail parties, I've found that even fans, rail fans who love to take photos of locomotives, don't care about observing the hours of railroad cars. Only me and the real railroaders. And I suspect Thoreau himself was tempted to count cars on trains and make notes about how long cars stayed on sidings when he rambled along country lanes looking for wildlife and wildflowers. Now, I should say, I don't really know where that quote came from. I'm pretty sure it's in one of these books. You may have read Walden, you may have read Thoreau on Cape Cod. We have Thoreau, Wild Fruits. He talks about things from apples growing to how the birch seeds, tiny little seeds, blow across the crisp snow. And what do they rub up against? The railroad siding. So I know he was walking along the railroads and lamenting the railroads destroying his rural perfection. But anyway, if somebody wants to look through the books, they can get the exact proper reference to that quote. I'll stay with the Penguin edition. I trust them. I think it really is a quote. Okay, so now I have two readings. I just had to work them into some broader theme that relates to how we're counting the hours, hoping to get through day after day of quarantine, worrying about the virus, hoping that cures and vaccines will be found, trying to keep faith that we will get through. So, what do I do next preparing for this talk? Well, what's easiest? What I usually do, wait for inspiration. And, as I've already described, I continued sorting through files, reorganizing bookshelves, hours every day for about a week or two. Then I came across this, which some of you may recognize as an interdepartmental envelope used by universities and companies. So you can send them to somebody and they'll send it back to somebody else and reuse them over and over again. And on the cover it says, "Talk after Clinton victory." And I said, aha, this is what I need. And I expected to go in and find notes from a talk I'd given in 1992 after Bill Clinton was elected. And it was part of a service at the First Church, Unitarian, Jamaica Plain. And I look inside and I find that there's actually a sermon, Reflections on the Election. And I said, aha, maybe I've got the notes here too. And sure enough, I looked in and I found, handwritten notes, which all you can tell it's a bunch of scrawls and crossing outs. And I said, okay, I could probably fashion something from that. And I started looking at what I had and found that I not only had the notes, they were actually well edited and reasonably well written and concise of what I actually said that day, November 8th, 1992. I suspect that I was given a pretty strict time limit and that someone was behind with a hook to pull me off. Today, I don't have that problem. Nancy's actually out on the porch and she promised to keep quiet, and I don't think she's going to cut me off. But in any case, I read this talk, and it turned out it was motivated by an op-ed piece by a disgruntled right-winger who blamed the 60s for ruining America. To put his words into the current vernacular, he was saying, okay, boomer, i.e. blaming my generation for all that he felt was wrong in America. I say my generation, and there may be some listening who disagree, but I say my generation is the boomers who were born after World War II. Actually, they were started after World War II. Do the math. I was born in September 1946. So it will be clear that I was indeed in the vanguard of the post-war baby boom. So, back to our friend, Mr. Thomas. He viewed Clinton's election as a triumph of all that was bad in the 60s. I viewed it as a return of the hope that I had felt shining so brightly when I was a student. I think most of what I said back then resonates with what we are seeing and feeling and hoping for today. So I think I'm just going to read what I said then. We'll take about 6 minutes and then come back and talk about how this applies to our current situation. So here we go. Reflections on the presidential election of 1992. Driving home from work on Tuesday, after hearing some of the exit polls, I suddenly felt elated. We're going to win. I realized this was a completely new feeling for me. Having voted for only one winner in 6 previous tries, and waiting for Jimmy Carter to win in 1976 was like rooting for Toronto to win the World Series after the Red Sox were out of the running. Today, I feel for the first time in 25 years that there's a chance for political progress in our country. This is 1992, not necessarily today. Yeah, something that I took for granted back in the 60s. Yes, the 1960s, when the torch of freedom burned brightly indeed. But many people see things differently today. On Saturday, November 7th, 1992, a few days before I first spoke this sermon, on Boston Globe's op-ed page, Cal Thomas referred to the election as the triumph of the dissolute. He wrote, "The torch may indeed have been passed to a new generation, but the light has gone out on the social and moral issues that are the heart of the nation. The children of the modern age have given us recreational drugs, condoms in the schools, AIDS, unprincipled television, open marriages, no-fault divorce, prenuptial agreements, and a nuclear strike on the home. A culture without eternal values, virtues, and morality, its foundation, cannot long survive." And Thomas is not alone. In the last couple of weeks, just prior to the election, I read that JFK was one of the most overrated presidents. By demonstrating against the Vietnam War, Bill Clinton somehow showed a lack of judgment. And sexual freedom in the 60s led to sexual harassment in the 90s. Well, this is again what I said back in 1992. As someone who went to high school and college in the 60s, I would like to remind people of what it was like to be young then, and to tell my grandchildren what it was like to be their age back in the 60s. Camelot was real. We believed in JFK. We believed in civil rights, the Peace Corps, the space program, and the pageantry that they brought to the White House. We did ask, what can we do for our country? The civil rights movement was real, a powerful influence on us as we watched confrontations in Alabama, marches on Washington, and passage of far-reaching legislation. We challenged institutions because we were lucky enough to be well-fed and well-educated, and to have a strong belief in democracy, human rights, and progress. We believed in progress. We thought things could change, and we tried to be involved. And then we watched the Vietnam War on TV. It slowly tore the nation apart. At home and in the field, it was a terrible struggle. And I refuse to allow anyone to tell me that it showed a lack of judgment to be against the war. Nearly everyone in college then was against the war. The question was what to do. JFK's leadership, civil rights, and the Vietnam War made us a political generation, but we weren't as tough as we thought we were. We were vulnerable, we were sacrificed, and we were screwed. JFK, our hero, was shot. Martin Luther King, the hero of the civil rights movement, was shot. The war escalated beyond reason. But we still had some hope. We still had hope the day that LBJ announced he was dropping out, leaving the field to Bobby Kennedy. And then Bobby Kennedy was shot. That's when the hope died for us. That's when the Republican monopoly began, when the conservative backlash on the 60s began. Soon we had Nixon, who had a plan to end the war. Nixon, who brought us Watergate. Nixon, who knew how to destroy the competition. We believe then, and we believe now, and I believe in 2020, that these were not random acts, but part of a successful general plan to shift to right-wing domination of politics. Jimmy Carter was destroyed by his failure to get the release of the Iranian hostages who were conveniently released on Reagan's inauguration. Then 12 years of me first, the rich get richer, escalating debt, despite failure to deal with the people who need help. The conservative backlash against the awakening of the 60s had turned into high gear, and presidential campaigns had turned into a grim joke repeated every 4 years. So yes, I was pleased by the result of this week's election back in 1992. So back to the present. Hope, faith, and charity in the time of Trump and Corona. That's where we are today. This is a situation similar to that we had in the 60s. Back then, the trials and the horrors of the Depression and the wars hadn't disappeared from memory, but they had receded. For our parents, they were very real. We heard about it all the time, but that had gone into the background. And I was a part of the new generation, which took for granted the little house in the yard in the suburb, the family car, TV, summer vacations. Then we went to school, went to high school. We began reading. We began to see cracks in the Leave It to Beaver life we had been living. In school and in books, we learned about slavery, U.S. troops slaughtering Indians, the Holocaust, World War II, segregation, anti-Semitism, mistreatment of women and minorities, mistreatment of gays, an endless war. We learned about the seamier and eviler sides of life. We wanted change and we hoped for change. And after JFK was elected and we moved to high school, we saw change. We saw the civil rights enacted. And we saw concern about the environment. But then hope died in 1968, as became more and more apparent over the next 25 years. Today, we're again at a point in history where hope seems to have died. We have the immediate issues of a corrupt president and the COVID-19 crisis. We also realize we cannot take for granted that we will have reasonably honest and effective government, fair elections, the rule of law, progress in race relations, and a broad consensus in support of education and science. We have all known for years that the country and the world order that sustained us since the 60s cannot continue without addressing climate change, income inequality, and racism. We know it, but we have not acted. And the younger generation of today is like the younger generation of the 60s. They could be repeating the mantra of that time. Don't trust anyone over 30. And we might agree with them. But those of us over 30, those of us well over 30, do have much to offer. First of all, we have seen cycles of hope and despair. Those of us at the vanguard of the baby boom have lived through the hope and despair and hope again that I have described. We not only know that hope should not die, we actually have faith that hope will stay alive and grow, and that we will be able to deal with the immediate problems of the virus and the corruption of Trumpism, and with the broader questions of income inequality and racism. We, the boomers and the other older generations, have resources. We not only have hope and faith, we do have charity. Charity in both senses, in terms of love and doing things for others. We all have our experience, our love for our family, friends, and neighbors, and we have life lessons that we can share with those in need. Some of us have skills that we can use to deal with the quarantine and whatever is needed and will be needed to reopen the country. And some of us have financial resources that we can use to support those in need and those local businesses struggling to survive. Hope, faith, and charity. That is what we all have, and that is what we can all share. And that is what I came to tell you today. Thank you.
Our closing hymn, specifically requested by Mr. Martland, is We Shall Overcome. And I have an organ performance courtesy of small church music. If anybody's curious, the reason for these guest music performances is that I was not on top of things enough to figure out the music, the hymns, before today, when it was obviously too late to ask Betsy Bear to play them for us. So I have found them in sources online that provide free music out of copyright for churches. closing words are number 687 from John W. Brigham. Go your ways, knowing not the answers to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than you know. May the blessings of love rest upon you. May peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore. Go in peace and know that you are loved and that your life is sacred. And please join us, if you can, next Sunday at around service time for a virtual coffee hour, virtual beginning of summer picnic. It's not Memorial Day weekend next week, that was this week, but we're not going to have a service so much as just an online gathering. And please join us if you can. I or somebody will send you a link a couple of days before, and then probably send it again right before. You should find this in your email, and we will record that conversation. Whatever happens in the conversation, we'll record. We may edit out any parts that seem like they shouldn't be public, but part of that will be available for those of you who can't join in to watch. So I hope that you can join us for a bit of a feeling of connection. And in June, from what I understand, coming up soon, a couple of weeks, 3, will be an outdoor flower communion service in front of the church building somewhere. That, of course, depends on the weather and on the progress of the coronavirus and efforts against it in Vigo County and Indiana. Everything is contingent upon that. Thank you very much for joining us for this 10th service recorded in my living room for the congregation and edited together by my son Leo Martland with a little help from me, but he's the one who knows what he's doing.